The wiper blades slapped against the windshield, fighting a losing war against the Montana snow. It wasn't the soft, powdery stuff tourist brochures promised. This was heavy, wet grit that turned the world into a grey smear. I killed the engine at the bottom of the winding driveway. The silence that rushed in was deafening. For 4 years, my world had been the rhythmic thumping of hydraulic pistons and the screaming wind of the North Sea. Silence felt wrong. It felt like holding your breath underwater, waiting for the pressure to crush you. My joints popped as I stepped out of the rental truck. 47 years old, but the last 4 felt like 20. My knees were shot from climbing derricks in gale-force winds, and my skin had that permanent weathered texture that no amount of scrubbing could smooth out. But I had the check in my pocket, the final payoff, the retirement fund. I looked up the hill. The house sat there like a crown jewel on the ridge. It was exactly as I had drawn it on a napkin in an Aberdeen pub 5 years ago. Cedar siding, floor-to-ceiling glass facing the valley, a wraparound deck. I had wired the money for the down payment, then the monthly mortgages, blindly, consistently. Every time I missed a birthday, every time I spent Christmas eating reheated stew in a bunk room that smelled of diesel and sweat, I told myself, it's for them. It was for Lucas. I grabbed my duffel bag military surplus, heavy canvas, and started the trudge up the driveway. I hadn't told them I was coming. I wanted to see the look on Lucas's face. I wanted to see my son, who was 20 when I left and 24 now. I wanted to see the life I bought for him and Jessica. The house was blazing with light. It looked like a luxury liner floating in the dark sea of the forest. I could hear music, something heavy, bass-driven thumping faintly against the glass. I was 20 yards from the front porch when I stopped. To the left of the main house, down a steep icy incline, stood the old tool shed. It was a structure I had intended to bulldoze years ago. Corrugated metal roof, rotting plywood walls, a single drafty window. It was meant for lawnmowers and rusty paint cans, but there was smoke curling from a makeshift chimney pipe jutting out of the wall. A blue tarp was nailed over the roof where the shingles had failed. And there were footprints, not a few, a path. A trampled muddy trench worn into the snow leading from the back door of the main house to the shed. I frowned, shifting the weight of my bag. Maybe Lucas had taken up woodworking. Maybe he was fixing up an old car. But the air smelled wrong. It didn't smell like sawdust or gasoline. It smelled like unwashed laundry and burnt plastic. I bypassed the main house. The cold was biting through my thermal jacket now, finding the gaps in my armour. I walked down the incline, my boots crunching loudly on the frozen crust. The wind howled through the pines, a low, mournful sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. I reached the shed door. It was hanging crooked on one hinge. There was no handle, just a loop of rope. I didn't knock. It was my property after all. I pulled the rope. The door scraped against the concrete floor with a shriek of protest. The inside was dim, lit only by a kerosene heater in the centre of the room and a battery-powered camping lantern hanging from a rafter. The heat hit me first, cloying, moist heat, heavy with the stench of mildew. "Pizza guy is late," a voice croaked from the corner. "Just leave it on the cooler." My blood froze. I knew that voice, but it was thin, reedy. It lacked the timbre of the boy I had hugged goodbye at the airport. "Lucas!" The figure in the corner scrambled. He had been lying on a cot, no, not even a cot. It was a stack of shipping pallets covered with a foam mattress topper and a pile of mismatched blankets. He jerked upright, knocking over a plastic bottle of water. He was wearing 3 layers of sweaters, fingerless gloves, and a beanie pulled low over his eyes. But I saw the face. Gaunt. That was the word. His cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut skin. His eyes were dark pits, surrounded by bruised purple circles. He looked like the junkies we used to chase off the docks in the 90s. "Dad?" he whispered. He didn't move to hug me. He flinched. He actually flinched, pulling his knees to his chest as if he expected a blow. I dropped my bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was calm. "It's a trick I learned in the military. When the engine blows and the ship is sinking, you don't scream, you get quiet." "Lucas, what are you doing in the shed?" Lucas looked past me, toward the open door, toward the main house glowing on the hill. Fear-pure, primal panic flashed across his face. "You have to go," he stammered, his teeth chattering despite the layers. "Dad, you can't be here. She has company. You didn't call. Why didn't you call? I took a step forward, ignoring the grime on the floor. I looked around the room, a bucket in the corner for a toilet, a hot plate plugged into a treacherous-looking extension cord that ran out the wall, a small cooler, and pictures. Pictures of me and him, fishing in the creek, taped to the rotting plywood walls like shrines. "Who has company?" I asked, stepping closer. Lucas stood up. He was shaking. He looked at his hands, then at me. "Jessica. She's hosting the partners from the firm. Dad, please. It's delicate. She said I was too messy, that I'd embarrass her. I just need to stay out here for a few days. It's fine. It's temporary." A few days. I reached out and touched the tarp hanging over a hole in the wall. It was stiff with frost. "There's mould on your pillow, Lucas. This isn't a few days." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. 6 months, he whispered. Maybe 8. I felt a sensation I hadn't felt since a rig blowout in 2009. A roaring in my ears, a pressure behind my eyes, the distinct metallic taste of adrenaline. 8 months, I repeated. I looked out the shed door. Through the falling snow I could see the massive living room window of the house I paid for. I saw the silhouette of a woman in a cocktail dress holding a wine glass, laughing, her head thrown back. I saw a man in a suit walk up behind her and place a hand on her lower back. Familiar. Intimate. She was warm. She was fed. She was living in the palace I built with my broken body. And my son was living in a box, shitting in a bucket. I looked back at Lucas. He was trembling, tears cutting clean tracks
The walk
through
up the hill
grime
took
on his
2
face.
minutes.
I counted every step. My boots left muddy streaks on the pristine white timber of the deck stairs. The music was louder up here. It wasn't just bass anymore. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the fake high-pitched laughter that people use when they're trying to impress someone. I didn't knock. I'd paid for the door, the lock and the wood it was mounted in. I turned the handle. Unlocked. Of course. Why lock the doors when you live in a fortress paid for by someone else? The heat hit me instantly. It was stifling, smelling of expensive cologne, roasted garlic, and red wine. I stepped onto the polished oak floors I had picked out from a catalogue 3 years ago while sitting in a cafeteria in the North Sea. I'd imagined my son's children playing on them. Instead, I saw a stranger's Italian leather shoes. I walked into the living room. The open-plan layout offered nowhere to hide. Jessica was standing by the kitchen island holding a wine glass. She looked good. Better than good. She was wearing a black dress that hugged every curve, her hair done up in something complicated and expensive. She looked like a woman who didn't have a care in the world. Standing next to her was a man. He was about my age, maybe younger, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. His hand was resting casually on the counter, inches from hers. Too close for a colleague. They froze when they saw me. I must have looked like a nightmare. A 6'2" man in dirty work clothes, face wind-burned, carrying the freezing cold of the grave into their warm sanctuary. "James?" Jessica's voice was a mixture of shock and annoyance. Not fear, not yet. She blinked, setting her glass down. What are you doing here? Lucas said you were extended for another 3 months." "Lucas says a lot of things," I said. My voice was low. The music was still playing, some smooth jazz playlist that didn't fit the violence in my veins. "Usually whatever you tell him to say." The man in the suit straightened up, puffing out his chest. A peacock trying to intimidate a wolf. "Excuse me? Who is this, Jess?" "Jess," I repeated, tasting the nickname. "She goes by Jess now." I took 2 heavy steps into the room. I didn't look at Jessica. I locked eyes with the man. "Get out," I said. The man scoffed. He had that soft look of someone who works in an office and thinks a stern HR letter is a weapon. "Now hold on a minute, buddy, you can't just walk into a private residence and—" I said, "Get out." I didn't shout. I just let the command hang in the air, heavy and absolute. I took another step. "This is my house. You're drinking my wine. You're breathing my air. If you're not out that front door in 30 seconds, I'm going to throw you through the window." He looked at me. Really looked at me. Saw the scars on my hands, the set of my jaw, the unhinged focus in my eyes, and his survival instinct finally kicked in. He looked at Jessica. I think I should go, Jessica." "David, don't be ridiculous," Jessica snapped, her eyes narrowing at me. "James, stop it. You're being dramatic. David is a partner at the law firm. He's helping us with the restructuring." Restructuring, I said flatly. Is that what we call it when you kick my son into a shed like a dog? The room went deadly silent. Even the jazz seemed to stop. David grabbed his coat from the sofa. I'll call you tomorrow, Jessica. He bolted. He didn't even look back. The front door slammed and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Now it was just us. Jessica crossed her arms. She didn't retreat. She was always good at defense. That was her talent. She could spin a situation until up was down and black was white. You have no right to come in here and embarrass me, she hissed. You've been gone for years, James. You don't know what it's been like. I saw the shed, Jessica. Lucas is sick, she lied instantly. The words came out smooth as silk. He's been having episodes, mental breakdowns. He refused to take his medication. He became aggressive. I didn't want him in there, James. He insisted. He said he felt safer in small spaces. I was terrified for him, but I couldn't force him to stay in the house if he didn't want to. It was a good lie. It used a grain of truth Lucas was anxious, and twisted it into a shield for her cruelty. He's eating ramen noodles off a cooler, I said, walking toward her. She finally took a step back, her hip bumping against the granite counter. He's freezing. He's terrified of you. He's terrified of life, she shouted, losing her cool. Your son is a failure, James. He couldn't hold a job. He couldn't fix the sink when it broke. He just sits around and mopes. Do you know how much this house costs to run? The heating bills alone. I paid the bills, I said. It's not enough, she shrieked. It's never enough. I have a standard of living to maintain. I work hard. I deserve a partner, not a child I have to babysit. So you evicted him. I gave him space. It was a trial separation while living on the same property. It was his idea. I stopped 3 feet from her. I could smell the wine on her breath. I looked around the kitchen. Sub-zero fridge, Viking range, quartz countertops, all of it bought with the overtime I worked while my hands bled. Trial separation, I repeated. And David? Was he part of the therapy? Jessica's face hardened. She realized the concerned wife act wasn't working. She switched tactics. The sneer appeared. This is my house too, James. My name is on the mail. I have rights. If you threaten me, or if you try to move that unstable boy back in here without my consent, I will call the police. I will tell them you, an absentee veteran with PTSD, threatened a woman in her own home. Who do you think they'll believe? She smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. She thought she had the winning hand. She thought the law, the house, and the narrative belonged to her. She didn't know I was the one who signed the deed. I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't scream. I didn't raise my hand. I felt that cold calm wash over me again. You're right, I said softly. Her smile faltered slightly. She hadn't expected me to agree. I'm tired, I said, rubbing my eyes. It's been a long flight. I'm going to go check on Lucas. You do that, she said, regaining her confidence. Tell him to keep the noise down. I have work in the morning. I turned and walked to the door. Oh, and Jessica, I said, pausing with my hand on the frame. What? Don't get too comfortable. I walked out into the cold night. The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't go back to the shed immediately. Instead, I walked to the main utility box on the side of the garage. I opened the panel. I looked at the master breaker for the main house. She liked the warmth, she liked the lights, she liked the power. I reached out and gripped the heavy plastic switch. The war had started. I didn't cut the power. Not yet. I stood there by the utility box, my hand hovering over the switch, watching the digital meter spin. It was spinning fast, burning dollars and cents every second to keep her warm, to keep David comfortable if he decided to come back. But chaos requires a plan. If I cut the lights now, she'd call the cops claiming harassment before I had my ducks in a row. I needed intel. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I trudged back down the hill to the shed. Inside, the air was still foul, but it was home for now. Lucas was sitting on the edge of the pallet, staring at his boots. He had stopped shaking, replaced by a sort of catatonic stillness. Did you kill her? He asked quietly, not looking up. No, I said. I engaged the lock on the flimsy shed door, a useless gesture but symbolic. But I made myself clear. I walked over to the corner and grabbed the kettle sitting on the hot plate. There was barely any water left. I poured what I had into a tin mug and handed it to him. Drink, I ordered. He took the mug with his left hand. His right arm stayed tucked close to his ribs, guarded. I noticed it earlier, but in the rage of the moment I hadn't processed it. Now, with the adrenaline fading into a cold, hard focus, I saw the way he favoured it. "Coat off," I said. Lucas froze. "Dad, it's freezing in here." "Coat off." He hesitated, then slowly peeled off the outer layer of the wool, then the flannel shirt underneath. He winced as the fabric pulled away from his right forearm. Under the dirty thermal undershirt, his wrist was a mess. It was swollen to twice its normal size, the skin a kaleidoscope of black, blue, and sickly yellow. The angle was wrong. Not fully snapped, but a fracture that had started to heal crooked. I gently took his hand. He hissed in pain, tears springing to his eyes instantly. "How old is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. 3 weeks, he whispered. "Did you go to the hospital?" "No." "Why?" I put his arm down gently. I felt sick. Not the seasickness of the North Sea, but a nausea that came from pure disgust. "Jessica said?" "She said our insurance lapsed," Lucas stammered, looking away. "She said because you were overseas the policy paperwork got messed up. She said an ER visit would cost $5,000 out of pocket. We didn't have the cash. She wrapped it for me. She gave me ibuprofen." I walked to the other side of the tiny room. I needed to distance myself before I punched through the plywood wall. "Insurance didn't lapse, Lucas. It's auto-paid. Platinum coverage." Lucas looked at me, confusion clouding his gaunt face. "But—" She showed me the letter. She showed me the bank statements. "Dad, the IRS froze everything." I turned around. "The IRS?" "She said you hadn't paid taxes on the foreign income," Lucas said, the words spilling out now. "She said they froze the accounts 6 months ago. That's why she had to act so weird. That's why she was hosting dinners, trying to network, trying to find a lawyer who would help us pro bono. She said we were broke, Dad. She said if I spent a dime, we'd lose the house completely." It was brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. She knew I was a contract worker. Tax laws for expats are complicated. It was a plausible lie for a young man who didn't know finance. She painted herself as the martyr fighting to save the family estate, and him as the liability who needed to hide to save money. "And you believed her," I said. "She's a paralegal, Dad. She knows this stuff. I'm just a mechanic." "You're a mechanic with a broken arm who lives in a shed." I sat down on the cooler opposite him. "Why didn't you call me? I have a sat phone. I have email." Lucas hung his head. This was the hardest part. "I tried," he said. "Or I wanted to, but she said you were struggling. She said the work was dangerous, that you were barely holding it together mentally. She told me you were ashamed of me." I stayed silent, letting him speak. "She said you went away for 4 years because you couldn't stand watching me fail at getting my business started. She said if I called you whining about money or my wife, you'd never come back. So I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to show you I could handle the hardship." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "I just wanted you to be proud that I didn't quit, Dad, even when it got cold." I closed my eyes. The wind rattled the loose tin on the roof. I'd been working double shifts, fighting 40-foot waves, thinking I was being the ultimate provider. Meanwhile, my silence had been weaponized against my own son. My checkbook had funded her affairs, and my absence had been used to break his spirit. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen his dignity. She had used his love for me as a leash to choke him with. I opened my eyes. I reached into my heavy duffel bag. I pulled out a roll of medical tape, a clean brace I used for sprains on the rig, and a bottle of high-proof whiskey. "Give me your arm," I said. "Dad, what about the IRS? What about the police?" "There is no IRS problem, Lucas," I said firmly, wrapping his wrist with the precision of an engineer. "There is no lapsed insurance. There is just a thief living in our house." I tightened the brace. He gritted his teeth but nodded. "The accounts?" he asked weakly. "I have about $400,000 in liquid cash in a separate account she doesn't know about," I lied. It was more like 50, but he needed to feel safe. He needed to feel powerful. "And I own the deed. It's in a trust. My trust." The realization hit him slowly. The shame on his face began to morph into something else. Anger. "She lied about everything," he whispered. "Yes." I finished the wrapping. "Drink," I pointed to the whiskey. He took a swig, coughing as it went down. "So what do we do?" Lucas asked. "Do we call a lawyer?" I looked at the pictures taped to the wall. Me and him. Happier times. A lawyer would take months. Eviction laws in this state were tricky. She had established residency. She could drag this out for a year while she destroyed the house out of spite. She'd claim abuse. She'd claim squatters' rights. No, I said, standing up. We don't call a lawyer, not yet. I went to the corner of the shed where the old breaker panel for the outbuildings was located. I checked the wiring. It was connected to the main grid, but on a sub-circuit. You're a mechanic, I said to Lucas. Can you bypass the hot water tank sensor on a standard residential unit? Lucas frowned, wiping his mouth. Yeah, it's easy. Why? And the septic pump? Can you reverse the flow without tripping the alarm? A spark of life returned to his eyes. A small dark smile touched his lips. It was the first time I'd seen him smile in years. Dad, he said, what are you planning? I grabbed my heavy coat and tossed his thickest parka at him. She wants to play games with house and home, I said, checking the lock on my knife again. Fine, let's show her what happens when the infrastructure fails. We're going to besiege her? No, I said, opening the shed door to the howling wind. We're going to evict her, one pipe at a time. War isn't just about bullets, it's about comfort. If you take away an enemy's sleep, their warmth and their sanitation, their will to fight crumbles in less than 48 hours. I learned that in basic training. I perfected it on the rig. Now I was teaching it to my son. The first move was subtle. We didn't cut the power completely that would be illegal. Denial of essential services gives a judge a reason to issue a restraining order. Instead, we introduced instability. Lucas worked the main breaker panel outside. He installed a rogue relay switch on the main line feeding the HVAC system. It wasn't broken, it just fluctuated. The heating system would run for 10 minutes, then trip for 2 hours, then blast hot air for 5 minutes, then nothing. By 2 a.m., the lights in the main house flickered like a possessed strobe light. I sat on the frozen ground near the shed, watching through a pair of binoculars. I saw Jessica pacing the living room wrapped in a fur coat, furiously tapping on her phone. She's calling the power company, Lucas said, crouching next to me. He was moving better now. The whiskey and the purpose had dulled the pain in his arm. Let her, I said. It's Saturday night in a blizzard. The grid is strained. They won't have a truck out here for 2 days. We waited. By 3 a.m., the temperature in the main house had likely dropped to 50 degrees. By 4 a.m., the flashing blue lights of a sheriff's cruiser swept up the driveway. Here we go, I said. Showtime. We didn't run. We stood by the shed, calm and visible, as 2 deputies crunched through the snow toward us. Jessica came bursting out of the front door, screaming, pointing a manicured finger at us. That's him! He's crazy! He's trying to freeze me to death! He tampered with the box! The lead deputy, a big man named Miller who looked like he'd rather be in bed, shined his flashlight in my face. Sir, step away from the structure, hands where I can see them. I held my hands up slowly. Evening, deputy. I'm James Caldwell. I own this property. He's trespassing, Jessica shrieked. I have residency. He's harassing me. Miller looked at me, then at the shivering woman, then at the dilapidated shed. Mr. Caldwell, can I see some ID? I handed him my license and the printed copy of the property deed I kept in my travel bag. I just got back from overseas, deputy. Found the heating system acting up. My son and I were just trying to troubleshoot the external breakers. Old wiring. It's a mess. He's lying, Jessica yelled. He did it on purpose. Ma'am, please lower your voice, Miller said, clearly annoyed. He handed my ID back. Sir, are you cutting your power? Absolutely not, I lied smoothly. But the grid is unstable in this storm. I'm an engineer. I'm trying to fix it so the pipes don't burst. But without parts, I shrugged. It's going to be a cold night. Miller looked at Jessica. Ma'am, if his name is on the deed, he's allowed to perform maintenance. If you think he's harassing you, you can file a civil suit on Monday. But right now, this is a domestic dispute. Unless he hits you, I can't arrest a man on his own land. But I'm freezing. I recommend extra blankets, Miller said, tipping his hat to me. Stay warm, folks. They drove off. Jessica stood on the porch, mouth open in disbelief. I waved at her. Just a small, polite wave. She screamed a primal sound of frustration and slammed the door. Phase 2, I said to Lucas, to water. We moved to the pump house near the well. This was Lucas's territory. He opened the valves with his good hand. We didn't cut the water off. That would be too merciful. Instead, we engaged the bypass valve for the hot water recirculation loop. It meant that every time she turned on a hot tap, she would get lukewarm water for 10 seconds, followed by ice-cold groundwater from the bottom of the aquifer. And then the sound. I used my heavy wrench to bang on the main intake pipe. The acoustics of the house magnified the sound. Clang, clang, clang. Inside the walls of the luxury master bedroom, it would sound like someone was hitting the house with a sledgehammer. Every 20 minutes, random intervals. Sleep deprivation is a powerful drug. We took turns. I slept from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. while Lucas kept watch. Then he slept. By noon on Sunday, the house looked like a mausoleum. The curtains were drawn. There was no smoke from the chimney. She didn't know how to open the flue, so she couldn't use the fireplace without smoking herself out. At 1 p.m, a plumbing van arrived. I met them at the gate. "Caldwell property?" the driver asked. "Yeah, I'm Mr. Caldwell," I said, leaning on the gate. "Look, my wife is having a mental break. She keeps calling tradesmen for imaginary problems. The furnace is fine. The pipes are fine. If you go up there, she won't pay you, and I'm certainly not authorising the work." The driver looked at the steep, icy driveway, then at his warm coffee. "Noted. Good luck, buddy." He U-turned and left. Lucas watched from the shed door, grinning. "That was cold, Dad." "She gaslit you for 8 months," I said. "I'm just returning the favour." But the coup de grace came at sunset. "Are you ready for the nuclear option?" Lucas asked. "Do it." Lucas crawled into the crawlspace access panel on the side of the house. He found the septic outflow valve. The house had a high-tech waste system. It relied on a grinder pump to move waste up the hill to the leach field. Lucas didn't break it. He simply reversed the polarity of the pump motor's wiring and closed the backflow preventer. Physics took over. 20 minutes later, we saw the bathroom light in the master suite turn on. Then, a few minutes later, the silhouette of Jessica moving toward the shower. We waited. Suddenly, the front door flew open. Jessica stumbled out onto the snowy porch. She was wearing a bathrobe, barefoot, coughing and retching. Even from 50 yards away, downwind, the smell hit us. It was vile. The pressure had backed up. The toilets, the drains, the sinks, they would all be overflowing with black sludge. She was gagging, slipping on the icy deck, fumbling for her phone with trembling hands. "That," I said, pouring the last of the whiskey into the tin cup, "is the smell of victory." Her phone rang. She wasn't calling the cops this time. She was calling me. I watched her hold the phone to her ear, shivering violently in the twilight. My pocket buzzed. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. "Hello?" "Make it stop," she screamed into the phone. She was sobbing now, hysterical. "There is sewage everywhere. The heat is off. I can't live like this." "It's a rough winter, Jess," I said calmly. "Old houses have problems." "I know you did this. I know it." "Prove it," I said. "Or you can leave. I'm sure David has a warm apartment." "I'm not leaving. My name's on the prenup." Morning broke like a bruise over the valley purple, cold and silent. The house was dead. No lights, no heat. Just a hulking mass of wood and glass filled with the stench of backflow. The siege had lasted 14 hours. I was leaning against the hood of my truck, sipping coffee from a thermos. Lucas stood next to me. He had shaved. He still looked gaunt, but the hunted look in his eyes was replaced by a grim anticipation. He looked less like a victim, and more like a witness to an execution. At 8:15 a.m. the cavalry arrived. But it wasn't the police. A black Range Rover crunched up the driveway, sliding slightly on the ice. David. He stepped out wearing a camel hair coat and looking furious. He was carrying a briefcase, a lawyer coming to save the damsel. The front door of the house opened and Jessica stumbled out. She was a wreck. She was wearing designer boots and dragging 2 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases. Her face was pale, her mascara smeared the portrait of a woman who had spent the night in a freezing, sewage-filled hell. She ran to David, sobbing, pointing at me. "Do something. Sue him. Get him arrested." David patted her shoulder, then marched toward me. He stopped 10 feet away, keeping a safe distance from the man who had threatened to throw him through a window. "Mr. Caldwell," David said, his voice trying for authority but quivering slightly in the wind. "This is constructive eviction. It's a felony. We've already drafted the complaint. We're going to sue you for distress, property damage, and illegal harassment. Jessica is not leaving until she gets her fair share of the asset." "Fair share?" I repeated, looking at the steam rising from my coffee. "She's entitled to 50% of the marital home," David shouted. "Plus alimony. You think you can just bully us? I'm a partner at Hasty & Miller. I will bury you in litigation for the next decade." Jessica stepped forward, emboldened by her protector. "You hear that, James? Half. I want half the house value in cash and I want it today, or we go to court. I looked at Lucas. Give me the folder. Lucas reached into the truck cab and handed me a thin manila folder. I didn't open it, I just tapped it against my palm. David, you're a lawyer, I said. So you know that marital assets are defined as property acquired during the marriage, or commingled funds. This house was bought 3 years ago, David sneered. They were married. I bought the house, I corrected. Cash, from an offshore account. It doesn't matter. It was the primary residence. Actually, I said, opening the folder, it matters a lot. Because you see, Jessica told Lucas a very interesting lie. She told him the IRS had frozen my assets. She told him I hadn't paid my taxes. Jessica's face went chalk white. She knew where this was going. So last night, while you were shivering, I continued, I logged into my accounts. Turns out the IRS never flagged me, but I did find some interesting transfers. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Moved from the joint household account to a private account in your name, Jessica. I pulled out a printed bank statement and let it flutter onto the snow. That's embezzlement, I said, but that's not the big one. I pulled out a second sheet, a photocopy of a letter. You forged a letter from the Department of the Treasury, I said, my voice hardening. You used a federal seal to trick your husband into financial ruin. You committed federal mail fraud and forgery to coerce a vulnerable person into living in a shed. I looked at David. He had stopped puffing out his chest. He was looking at the forged document in my hand and then at Jessica. He was doing the math. Representing a gold digger is one thing. Being an accomplice to federal fraud is a career ender. David, I said pleasantly, how does the Bar Association feel about partners who assist in defrauding veterans? David took a step back. I didn't know about the letters. No, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Well, you know now, so here are your options. I tossed the folder onto the hood of the Range Rover. Option A, you file your lawsuit. I countersue, and I hand this folder to the FBI. Jessica goes to prison for fraud and elder abuse financial manipulation of a dependent. You get disbarred for ethics violations. Jessica let out a choked sob. David, option B, I pointed down the driveway. You load those suitcases into that expensive car. You leave. You never call my son again. You sign the annulment papers I'm going to send over tomorrow citing fraud, which voids the marriage and the prenup instantly. And you pray I'm too busy repairing my house to press charges. Silence. The wind howled through the trees. The house creaked, cold and empty behind us. Jessica looked at David, desperate for him to find a loophole. David looked at me, then at the folder. He recognized a losing hand when he saw one. He picked up the folder and handed it back to me. Get in the car, Jessica, David said quietly. But, get in the damn car, David roared, his facade cracking. It's over. He has you on a felony. Jessica looked at me one last time. There was no smugness left. Just the hollow, ugly realization that the ride was over. She looked at Lucas, standing tall beside me, no longer her victim. She didn't say a word. She turned, dragged her suitcases to the trunk and threw them in. They drove off. We watched the Range Rover disappear around the bend of the pines. I didn't feel happy. I felt drained. I turned to Lucas. You okay? Lucas was staring at the spot where the car had vanished. He took a deep breath of the freezing air, filling his lungs properly for the first time in months. Yeah, he said. His voice was stronger. Yeah, I think I am. Good. I picked up the thermos. Now comes the hard part. What's that? I looked back at the beautiful, freezing, sewage-tainted house. We have to clean up the mess. Lucas looked at the house, then at his broken arm, then at me. He smiled. It was a real smile this time. I know a guy, Lucas said. He's a pretty good mechanic, works for cheap, and his dad is an engineer. I clapped him on the shoulder, the good one. Let's get to work. We walked up the hill together, leaving the shed behind us, ready to reclaim the warmth.